So tonight I wanted to start out with telling you a little bit about myself and give y'all my testimony, but the Lord had put on my heart to talk about don't give up. And so where that led me to was the book of Job. So anyways, I'm going to start with Psalms 107, verses 2 and 3. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. Those he redeemed from the hand of the foe. Those he gathered from the lands from east and west, from north and south. So my name is Lauren King, and I was born in 1981, so I'm 42 years old. I was born to Kenny Lynn King and Debbie King. I have one sister named Kim King, who is 8 years older. One of my first memories, unfortunately, was whenever I was 3 years old and I was molested. I don't know who it was. I just have a figure in my head of a man that came in the bathroom and molested me. I never told my mom, and of course I didn't know how to really explain that at that age, and she never realized that anything had happened to me. At the age of 5, we moved to Cardwell, Missouri, and we lived there until I was 18. At around the age of 8, I was molested by my female cousin, and unfortunately she wanted to play house the way she was taught, so that led to a lot of trauma from that. I did not tell my dad, who was living at the time, and my mom. Once again, I didn't know how to express that to her. And at the age of 9 or 10, somewhere around then, my dad was diagnosed with leukemia. And that was one of my life-changing events. I seen my father go downhill every day in front of my eyes. He was the strongest man I knew. And he ended up losing so much weight to where he was just bones and he couldn't even walk. But he did go into remission for 6 months, but then leukemia came back, and it was a different kind. And at that time, back in 1991, they didn't know how to treat leukemia on adults. So he lost his life on July 19th of 1992. And that is really hard still today to talk about sometimes. At the funeral, I remember a doctor being there and my sister refusing to get up from the chairs, screaming at the top of her lungs saying she couldn't leave my father there. And there was a doctor there that immediately came and injected her with Valium through her pants there. That was very traumatic for me. Then they put me in the car with my aunt that no one liked. So Mom, literally, I got stuck with a woman I didn't even know and that everyone did not like. So I felt like I was a piece of trash and I was discarded and I had no worth at that time. So after my father had passed, I would sit at home on the couch and wait every day looking out the window waiting for his return because I did not get closure. Whenever he died, he had left and went to the hospital and he was there for 2 weeks, and my mom and them didn't let me go to the hospital to see him because they didn't want me to remember him that way. So my dad looked healthy whenever he left, so I didn't understand why he didn't come back. At the age of 13, I became anorexic and bulimic, and because my world was so much chaos because I had lost my dad and I didn't know what to do without him, that was the only thing I could control. I could control what I put in my mouth and what I didn't keep in my body. So I began hiding mason jars in my closet for my mom, and I would wait till she would leave, and then I would go get rid of those. And then at the age of 15, my best friend's dad at that time gave us our first line of methamphetamine. She was 13 and I was 15. And I started smoking weed, I started drinking, and at that time, I loved the way meth made me feel. I could lose the weight. I wasn't getting bullied for my weight anymore. I didn't eat, so I didn't have to worry about binging and purging anymore. So I continued to do that. At 17, I thought that I ended up getting alcohol poisoning whenever I went to go hang out with a guy, and we went to ride the levees, and I was drinking, and I got out to use the restroom and fell down the levee, to where he then took advantage of me on the side of the levee and then took me back to my friend's house, literally dropped me off in the yard and left me there throwing up as I was telling her parents what had happened, and he's calling me names and calling me a liar as he drove off. So I realized that at that point I thought, well, no one's ever going to believe me on anything if anything else ever happened, which it does later. But despite all that, I graduated 4th in my class while still using meth and smoking pot and drinking and smoking cigarettes. I started going to frat parties at ASU, and I was with a guy that I thought was dating me, only to realize that he had gave me a drink, which looking back, I'm pretty sure I was roofied because as soon as I drank it, I got sleepy. And he walked me back to a room and laid me down into a bed to where I woke up with his best friend taking advantage of me. So I was raped at the age of 18, and all I remember was staring out the window, pouring down rain, and my tears were just going down the side of my face, and I was trying to fight, and all I remember is him covering my mouth and just telling me to be quiet, it'll be over soon. And at that time, it was not uncommon for people to be raped at frat parties, but no one ever believed them, and it would seem like nobody was ever getting charges, so I felt like, what's the point? And I also, I remember laying there and thinking, why? Why would this happen? Why did God let that happen? But now looking back, I have to realize that we put ourselves in those positions. It wasn't God wanting that to happen to us. We put ourselves in that position, getting drunk, and allowing that to happen to us. So, whenever I was 18, I moved to Jonesboro, and I rented a room from a woman with another one of my friends from high school. We were still getting high, drinking. I added Klonopin to the mix along with Xanax. And during this time, my landlord invited over a guy that she had never even met really to hang out. And I had been in my room drinking by myself and decided I wanted to go to bed because I needed to work the next morning. And so I passed out and I woke up being raped once again by the man that she had invited over to the house. I froze in that moment because I remembered that everything from that previous experience came back to me, and I thought, well, if I just lay here, it'll be over soon. So I was raped for the second time. And then one day I came home from work and was going to tell my landlord that I was ready, I was going to move out, and she pulled a gun on me. She pointed it at my chest and told me that she was going to shoot unless I told her the truth about whether I wanted her ex-husband or not, which I didn't, and I slowly started backing away, and she pulled the trigger. But looking back now, I can see that God was protecting me because the gun jammed, and I ran upstairs and left immediately, and I moved out of that apartment. Shortly after that, I met another guy, of course, because that's one of my things. And I met a guy at work and had sex with him, and within a month, I was pregnant with Natalia, my oldest daughter. We got married when I was 5 or 6 months pregnant, and I stayed clean during the pregnancy, and she was born January of 2002. When she was 6 months old, I went to nursing school, and that was really hard being a single mom with, well, not a single mom, we were married, but he worked night shift. I was going to school full-time during the day. But I managed to go through nursing school, and I graduated July of 2003. And then sometime in 2004, I divorced Natalia's dad. I ended up cheating on him because I had no respect for him, honestly. And then I moved to Paragould. I continued working full-time as a nurse, and I met my second husband, who was significantly older than me, and I thought he was more stable, so it would be a great marriage, even though he was married when we first met. Hence the part where Suzanne says, God will never send you a married man. Whenever we were married, since he cheated on his wife to be with me, I don't know why I wouldn't think that he wouldn't cheat on me. He cheated on me with multiple women I worked with, and I found a card from one of the women's sons in a drawer talking about thanks for coming by, and that's how I found out. So he started drinking and became abusive that night, and Natalia was with me, and he ended up ripping my shirt off in front of her in an altercation where I was fighting to get away, and I kicked his hand, breaking his finger, and I ran out and left everything and came back later to get my possessions. We then moved to Corning, where I worked at a nursing home, and a coworker introduced me to yet another man, and it was her brother. So we went out, and we eventually moved in together. And shortly after, I realized that he was an abusive alcoholic. At this point, once he started beating on me and stuff, I started stealing hydrocodones from the nursing home that I worked at. I was stealing from the bedridden patients. I started out slow, just like 1 or 2 here and there, but it eventually got up to about 10 a day at that point. But I did get caught, and I didn't lie when the police questioned me. I told them the truth, and they turned me into the State Board of Nursing and, of course, to the police, and I voluntarily surrendered my nursing license and ended up with a felony theft charge with 5 years of probation. At this point, the physical abuse started getting worse and would continue for about 6 years. In August of 2008, I found out I was pregnant and stopped taking the pills, and I stopped drinking. While I was pregnant, I took probably one of the worst beatings I ever experienced with him. I'd never been hit so hard in the face and head before. I buckled to my knees more than once and seen white flashes of lights. The last time he almost knocked me out, I curled up into a ball on the floor crying, "I'm pregnant," for him to just stop. But instead, he just reared his steel-toe boot back and kept kicking me even harder in the stomach. Once I quit moving for a while, he quit and he left the house to go to a bar. When I finally got up, I had pump knots all over my head, my face. My hair was stuck to the peepholes in the house, or in the door of the house, and I had multiple bruises all over my body, and I did start spotting at that time too, but I didn't lose him. I left for a couple days to only return later after he would ask me to come back. And then in April of 2009, I gave birth to Kendon after all that abuse. 2.5 months later, I found out I was pregnant again, and which I'd already been on hydros again since giving birth to Kendon. They gave me hydros for giving birth to a child. And I told the kid's dad, and he asked me to get an abortion, and I didn't. And they continued to prescribe me hydros throughout the pregnancy, and that also added Ambien so I could sleep, which was horrible because I slept, walked, and was eating frozen food out of the freezer and everything. And so anyways, they decreased that, but that was horrible. And then in April of 2010, Carson was born, which y'all all know. This vicious cycle of emotional and physical abuse continued. I was told that no one would ever want me with 3 children. I was told that I was worthless and that I would never amount to anything. And I believed him. This cycle repeated over and over until it came to a head one night at his sister's house. He was drunk and we had argued, and he pulled out a pistol. He proceeded to come closer and put the cold barrel to my forehead. His brother-in-law kept talking to him, asking him to put the gun down, and I looked at him in the eyes and told him to pull the trigger because I was already in hell. Unfortunately, he didn't, though. He did put the gun down. And then I left, and I went and filed an ex parte and got a restraining order. And then I packed the kids up, left everything there, and I moved back to Leachville, where I went to school and stuff my mom taught. And that was in 2014. I was beaten down, tired, exhausted, and wanted peace. But it wasn't long after moving back to Leachville, I started using meth again and pills. I would work while using until I couldn't function anymore. I ended up going to a weekend detox at one time, but I returned back to the same place, same town, same people, same job, and I relapsed within 2 weeks. But I didn't know Jesus then either, but just saying. This time was worse than before. Of course, it started with half a pill here and then a line of dope, but it would rapidly increase. I got into yet another relationship in 2018 while still being in my addiction. I tried to continuously hide the fact of my drug use. I used all of my paycheck on drugs, had my mom pay my bills, and used my boyfriend at that time's check as well. In 2019, I started prostituting myself to different men for money or for pills or for my next fix of dope. I didn't care if they were married or not. I had no control over my addiction. It controlled me. My boyfriend at the time would stay gone all week for work, so I'd do what I wanted all week long and then spend time with him on the weekends. And at the end of our relationship, I hit rock bottom. I was doing, I don't know, probably over a gram of dope a day easily, but I was taking 60 hydrocodones a day. And I was smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day and started drinking more heavily and wanted to die. Yeah, 60. It's bad. I tried once during the last 6 months of him and I being together to kill myself by taking a bottle of Tylenol PM, but woke up 5 hours later just getting sick and throwing up. Finally, I'd gotten so mad and in a fit of rage because he had talked to his ex-wife on the phone in front of me that I heard a voice tell me to kill myself. So I got in my Jeep and I decided I was going to finally do it and I was going to end my life. It was still barely daylight outside, but I drove straight into a tree as fast as I could. This is where things get a little blurry for me and I have a hard time explaining what happened. But on the way to the tree, I prayed to God. I cried out to the Lord in my despair. I asked him to take my life as I knew it because I just wanted to be with my Father in heaven. And I know that the Lord heard me because he answered it. He just answered it different than what I thought it was going to be. When I hit the tree, I remember everything in slow motion. I remember it coming to a dead stop. I remember airbags being deployed and something like glitter flying through the air, which was glass actually. I started to come out of my seat and felt the steering wheel start to crush my legs. And the last thing I remember in that wreck was the sound of my neck popping like it snapped as it hit the roof of my Jeep. I remember being so cold for a few minutes after that. It's like everything went dark for a while. Next thing I know, I start feeling like I was warming up and realized I was walking down the road. I was out of the wrecked car. It was dark outside, and I thought my legs were broke even though I was walking. I called a friend who picked me up and went to her house and pulled my pants down and I asked her to see if my legs were broke, but they weren't. I didn't have a single bruise or scratch on me anywhere from the wreck. She took me home, and there laying in my driveway was a cervical collar. I don't know how it got there, but a thought came to my mind all of a sudden, and that thought was that was supposed to be me with that neck brace on after everything happened. I did try to hit a meth pop the next night, but I handed it back to the drug dealer and I said, I don't want this anymore. And I said, I'm going to faith-based rehab, and then I contacted Suzanne. And I even had people, this is how like the Lord delivered me and answered my prayer whenever I hit that tree. I thought he was going to take my life and that was going to be it. No, he took the life as I knew it and gave me a new life. Y'all was smoking 3 packs a day. That was hard to quit the cigarettes, so I understand y'all having a hard time quitting. I do. But the hydros, I had people offer me hydros and I turned them down. I was like, I don't want that. And the meth, I did try one more time and it was like, why am I doing this? And I handed it back. And so whenever prayer is so important, if y'all pray, like he can answer your prayers if you'll just allow him to. But you have to believe when you're praying and open your heart for him to open those prayers or to answer those prayers. Because I didn't even know what I was praying whenever I prayed that, honestly, because I thank him every day. That's why whenever I thank Jesus, I mean it, because his air is in my lungs because I'm supposed to be dead. I was supposed to die in that wreck, and I'm here now talking to y'all. And I get to praise him and sing to him every day that I want to. Here at church with my daughter. And anyway, sorry. I smoked my last cig going into detox, and I haven't touched one since, and I do not even want to touch one. He delivered me from that. And I just want to let y'all know that then I got here to the ministry, and I cried for the first 3 days I was here. I missed my family. I cried. I would go to classes and participate, but I cried. It was hard. I'd had my kids every day, except for they would go to their dads every other weekend. So I was that full-time parent, even though I was in addiction, and would leave them sometimes for hours to go do my drugs. But so it is hard. But when you realize that it is a break from the world, you can get so much peace out of that. Once I realized that I don't have to worry about a phone ringing from an old drug dealer or just stupid things, and you just get to sit here and read the Word of God. And that can change your life, but you have to want it. You have to want to be different. And it's just, you got to want it. So I quit worrying about what I wanted, and I read the Word. I started applying it and realized that I was changing because of Him, not because of anything I did. It's because of Him. My thoughts aren't the same, and I didn't want the same things I used to. When I first came in here, I wanted to run right back and get my kids as soon as I got out. But about 2 or 3 months in the program, I went straight to Suzanne and I said, I'm supposed to be here as staff. She's like, well, we'll talk about it when you get further along. But I wanted to give back. I wanted to serve at the ministry, help women coming out of addiction, just like I was helped. I remember when I was shortly here in the program, I would go up to Amy and I would ask her questions. And I appreciate that. Crystal, too. Crystal was in the program with me. And we would sit there and talk about the Word of God. I mean, you've got to find the people that are doing the right things if you want the help. And like I said, now I get to praise Jesus and serve Him instead of the devil. And one of the blessings that I want to talk about was whenever I did graduate. The day I graduated, Carson got baptized here by Poppy. And so not only did Jesus give me a new life, He saved my daughters too. You know, and she loves to get up here. She loves every one of you girls. She asked about y'all whenever I talked to her on the phone. Y'all don't realize how many lives that y'all touch just being in this program, because y'all touch my daughter's life, because my daughter still asks about Presley. So I just want y'all to know that y'all touch more people than what y'all realize. So, and with all that, that's pretty much the end of my testimony. I've been serving here for over a year now. I enjoy it. I love each and every one of y'all. And that led me to the whole thing about don't give up. I've been hearing it, do not give up, do not give up. And I'll tell you about a time whenever I was here for 6 months, I almost gave up. I held someone accountable that I thought was my friend, and she got upset with me. And I was grabbing my Bible and my shoes, and I was going to walk out. But then Tabby stopped me, and she prayed with me on the steps. And I stayed and realized that the Lord and my walk with Him is so much more important than, no offense, but friendships right now. Like, I had to focus on the Lord because I was not going to get any better if I didn't read my Word. So, with all that said, I was wanting to talk about the book of Job just a little bit. What I like about the book of Job is that we have a picture of a man who was reduced to just his raw existence. It was just him. Everything that we think is necessary for life and everything that we think is important for our lives is stripped away from him. His possessions, his family, his friends, his health, everything was lost. He even lost the sense of his own worth, and he began to curse the day he was born and cry out for death. Does that possibly sound familiar to anybody? Okay. All right. So a little bit of background, it comes from chapter 1. Job was from Uz, and he was a man of complete integrity who feared God and turned away from evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, 7,000 sheep and goats, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys, and a very large number of servants. And Satan was talking to the Lord, and he answered him, saying, does Job fear God for nothing? And in verse 10 through 12, it says, having you placed a hedge around him, his household, and everything he owns, you have blessed his hands and his possessions and have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he owns, and he will surely curse you to your face. Very well, the Lord told Satan, everything he owns is in your power. However, do not lay a hand on Job himself. So Satan left the Lord's presence. And so after all this happened, a messenger came up to Job, and he said that his oxen and his donkeys were taken away by the Sabaeans, and they struck all the servants down, except for one messenger alone escaped. And then while that messenger was still speaking, another one came up saying that God's fire fell from heaven, burning the sheep and the servants, devouring them, and that messenger alone escaped as well. Same thing again, the messenger was speaking, the Chaldeans came forming 3 bands, raiding the camels and took them away, struck the servants with the sword, and one messenger alone escaped. And it happened again. The messenger speaking, another comes up. The sons and daughters of Job were eating and drinking wine in the eldest brother's house, and suddenly a powerful wind from the desert came and struck the four corners of the house, causing it to collapse on Job's children. So they all died, but the one messenger escaped to tell Job. Then Job stood up, tore his robe, shaved his head. He fell to the ground. And did he curse God? No. He worshiped. He worshiped God, even in all that. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will leave this life. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So throughout all that, Job did not sin or blame God for anything. No matter, like he could have gave up. He could have gave up, but he didn't. Instead, when all of that part of the bad stuff came, he bowed down and worshiped God. So in Job 2:7, Satan left the Lord's presence again, and he infected Job with terrible boils from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. And he scraped himself with broken pottery while he sat among the ashes. And even his wife came up to him, which I thought was kind of brutal, and she was like, are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die. Like she just told him where to go because he was still believing in God. Yet Job still didn't give up. He tells her she is foolish and asks, should we accept only good from God and not adversity? And then the next several chapters, Job has three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They heard about Job's adversity and they come to comfort and console him. But when they looked from a distance, they could barely recognize him. And when I was reading this, it reminded me of how in my addiction, if I hadn't seen somebody for a while and then they come to see me from a distance, they wouldn't have recognized me. Like I was so emaciated, malnourished. I had sores from picking. So it just makes me think about that. His friends sat with him for 7 days and nights, not even uttering a word because they seen how great his suffering was. And then Job chapter 3, he's finally saying that he's miserable and wishing he wasn't born. He says he began to speak after the 7 days and he cursed the day he was born. And it ends in verse 26 saying that he has no peace, no quietness, but only turmoil. And that was how I felt. I was miserable in my addiction. I wished I hadn't been born. I wanted to take my life, but the Lord didn't allow that. And I had no peace, no quietness, and only turmoil inside of me. And I'm sure all of y'all can relate to that part. In the next several chapters, it goes on like a debate between his three friends and Job. Like they would say something to him, Job would reply, and they're basically telling him that you must have sinned against God, or your kids sinned against God while they're drinking and everything that they were doing, and you're a liar is what they're pretty much telling Job. And one thing also that happened to Job that I found interesting was in chapter 7, verse 5, he had worms. It was even in his sores. It's kind of gross, but I was like, man, that would be horrible. Like he had worms, he had dirt clods, and he would just scrape and cut at his sores because they would itch so bad and it was festering. Sorry, I got kind of gross on that, but I also find it interesting in chapter 25 that Bildad, he's really down on Job. Like Job hadn't gone through enough already, but he asked Job how any man who is a maggot and a worm could believe and say that they are righteous before God. Like your friends are supposed to come and console you and comfort you, and all they did was pretty much condemn him and make him feel worse about his situation. So it makes me think of those so-called friends that we had in our addiction that always said that we was going to be worthless and never amount to anything and just be a drug addict all of our lives. But I love in Job's final words to his friends where he says, this is in chapter 30, it says, as long as I have life in me, the breath of God in my nostrils, my lips will not say anything wicked, and my tongue will not utter lies. I will never admit that you are in the right. Till I die, I will not deny my integrity. I will maintain my innocence and never let go of it. My conscience will not reproach me as long as I live. He still, after everything, claims his righteousness and the God he serves, even though he felt useless, defenseless, and aggravated. So, at the end of Job, I'm just kind of going over the whole book. I know it's a lot, but Job becomes silent. whenever God speaks to him. And he's saying that he's unworthy to reply to the Lord. And as the Lord kept talking with Job, Job's greatest need was not to know why things happened to him, but he wanted to know who was in control. Upon seeing God through the whirlwind, Job was humbled and he repented. And he finally realized that God alone runs the universe. He did confess his lack of faith in God and his bitterness of attitude during the time of suffering, though. In the end, God spoke to the three friends, saying he was angry with them for not speaking the truth about him, as his servant Job had. He had them take 7 bulls and 7 rams as a burnt offering sacrifice for themselves. Then he had Job pray for them, and God would accept his prayer and not deal with them according to their foolishness. So after Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. All his brothers and sisters and everyone who had known him before came and ate with him in his house. They comforted and consoled him over all the troubles the Lord had brought on him, and each one gave him a piece of silver and a gold ring. The Lord blessed the latter part of Job's life more than the former part. He had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, and 1,000 yoke of oxen and donkeys. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and nowhere in all the land were there found women as beautiful as Job's daughters. And their father granted them an inheritance along with their brothers. And after this, Job lived 140 years. He saw his children and their children to the 4th generation, and so Job died, an old man of full years. So to me, the book of Job is about not giving up even in the suffering. Think about all the blessings that he would have missed out on if he had given up on God. God restored twice as much back to him, and he didn't give up. And I mean, that was pretty miserable. I know that a lot of times in here we complain. We complain it's too hot. We complain we don't want to work here. We don't want to do that. But Job had sores on him with worms, lost every one of his children and everything, and yet he still believed in God and kept going and doing. And I just want to say, being here, the Lord is already restoring your health. Like, you're already getting healthier as you sit here at the ministry. Well, not sit because we work and move, but and also, like, some of your families are being restored already, where we had done so much damage, treated them horribly, stole from them, lied, everything. But some of those families are getting restored already. And this is just the beginning of blessings for you if you stay the course and stay here. And I just wanted to say to don't give up. That's what I want to say. So,